Hello, everyone. I hope you are all safe and well at this current time. So the UK government have recently announced some new incentives to tackle the unemployment crisis due to the current pandemic. And in line with these new incentives, we thought we'd invite someone along from one of our registered training providers to talk more about them and how you can access them and which ones will be most relevant to your business. So I'm kindly joined this morning by Jenny Pelling. So Jenny, how are you? Are you well?
I'm well, thanks. I just had a little bit of surgery in my mouth, so I'm feeling a bit like a chipmunk this morning. But other than that, I'm very well, thank you.
Oh dear, good. So just to start, just to let everyone know, Jenny's from an organisation called Kaplan. If we can start by, you can introduce yourselves, let everyone know a bit more about your role at Kaplan and the organisation.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I'm the Apprenticeship Partnerships Director at Kaplan, which is a role I really relish because it means I work with our key clients on designing and developing apprenticeship programs and what works best for them. And how they can make the most of any government program on funding, for example. Kaplan, as many of you I'm sure know, is a global provider of accountancy and tax and financial services training and coaching. And we've had the pleasure of working closely with CIMA. We support a lot of learners through CIMA qualifications and through teaching those as part of the accountancy and tax standards and the junior management consultant apprenticeship as well. And recently we were thrilled that one of our apprentices became the joint first in the world for the management case study. So we're really delighted to work closely with CIMA. And we teach through a variety of ways, fantastic on-demand programs, live online, and really excitingly, yesterday we announced that we're going back into the classroom. So in September, in smaller numbers, in some of our locations, we will finally be back into the classroom for teaching, which is great news. And there's so much change going on in apprenticeships and funding all the time. So part of my role is to brief clients on what those changes are and how they can make the most of the incentive payments if they wish that we're going to be looking at today.
Brilliant. Yes, exactly. The ideal person to talk about this subject. So let's start because there's been quite a number of new incentives that have been announced. So could we start with that, talking about firstly what incentives have been announced and how would an employer choose which incentive to utilise? And we've got this slide here to talk through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it all happened on the 8th of July, which was a bit of a game changer day when Rishi Sunak announced these new incentives. And it's part of the government's drive to assist employers and the economy to cope with COVID-19 and to encourage employers to retain staff and recruit new staff. So there were 4 incentives announced, which are on the screen at the moment. So traineeships is the first to look at. And this really is pre-employment work experience is a way of thinking of it. Some people look at it as a quasi-internship. And they're usually sort of 4 to 6 weeks, unpaid for the individual, but the employer can receive £1,000 for taking on a trainee. So that's one direct financial benefit from bringing on a trainee and worth investigating. The second is called the Kickstart Scheme. And this is longer. It's a scheme that involves employers working with their job centres because you can only make the most of this. You can only use this Kickstart program if you are bringing in to your business somebody who's been referred to you by the job centre. So it's a direct link to unemployment and addressing that. Yeah. It's for 16 to 24-year-olds, a minimum of 6 months hire there. And one thing to really note with the Kickstart scheme is that they don't come in as an apprentice. They're coming in, they need some greater work readiness skills. So there's coaching that happens alongside that to assist them in the transition from having been unemployed to being in the workplace. So that was the Kickstart scheme. The furloughed worker scheme, now we're all aware of this. It's been in place, furlough payments for a while, but this incentive here was to help address the end of the furlough scheme. So it's an incentive payment for employers who are retaining their employees that they're bringing back from furlough. And that could be an apprentice or a non-apprentice, but it's £1,000 payment for bringing back somebody on furlough, and there's some time restraints around that. So that's linked to the job retention scheme. That was the third announcement. And the fourth was, quite excitingly, an apprenticeship-specific incentive here. And this is the two new payments. One is for 16 to 24-year-olds, which is a £2,000 payment to the employer, and the other is for 25-plus-year-olds, which is £1,500 payment to the employer. But there are quite clear rules around who is eligible for this. So the apprentice must be new. It must be a new recruit to your business. You choose who they are, but you must be new, and they can't have worked for you in the previous 6 months either. So you have to bring them in, and they need to have a contract of employment and apprenticeship agreement from the 1st of August 2020 up until the 31st of January 2021. So really watch that if you're interested in those incentive payments. Yes, they're good, but make sure that you comply with those requirements.
Lovely. Thank you very much. I think that's really useful. And in my own mind anyway, it allows me to understand how, which ones will be most relevant depending on an employer's circumstance. But also you can see where some can tie into others, like the traineeship potentially through to an apprenticeship afterwards, the kickstart that can move on to an apprenticeship as well.
Yeah, precisely.
So in line, this is a number of great incentives, but actually, pre-COVID and pre-pandemic, we already had some incentives available for apprenticeship. So for those that weren't aware of those, Jenny, would you be able to let people know what they were, but also just to let them know, how do these now tie in with the new incentives? Are you able to utilize both?
Yeah, good point. There's Jason, there's an often overlooked incentive that's been there for a long time. It doesn't go away, but not everybody uses, and that's around national insurance contributions. Yes. And there is a rebate available of 11% of gross pay, and it's sometimes news to employers that exists. So that's something that you can effect through payroll by entering code, and really worth making sure that you're doing that, because that's a fine saving to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the second one was around a payment that was always made to employers of 16 to 18-year-old apprentices, or somebody up to the age of 24 who was on an education and healthcare plan or had been in care. And in those situations, the employer was given £1,000 for somebody in that category or those categories, and that will still continue. Okay. So there, if we're thinking about A-level students who are getting their calculated results this Thursday, if you're looking at school leavers coming into your business as an apprentice, there you have two incentives that could work for you immediately. You have the £1,000 payment if they're 16 to 18 still, and you would have the £2,000 new Rishi Sunak in apprenticeship employment incentive of £2,000. So those previous ones don't go away. They can just be used in addition to the July announcements.
Fantastic. So yeah, so lots of benefits and useful cost savings, I suppose, for employers to benefit from. So the last question I had for you was in regards to the government requirements to access these incentives. Now, you've already noted one in terms of the apprenticeship incentive, in terms of the contract of employment and the start date. So are there any others that employers should be aware of?
Yes, Jason, as with everything, there is some small print around, isn't there? So yeah, really good question. And yes, there are some restrictions there. So if we think back to traineeships, so they shouldn't have a qualification above level 3. So you need to watch that one. For the Kickstart scheme, there must be job centre referred, can't go on to an apprenticeship immediately, so really need to watch that, and they will take slightly longer to get into the flow of work, hence the coaching that's going to be provided by job centre teams there. So that's one to really think about. And just to reiterate the importance around the apprenticeship incentives and the rules there is, I've said it's got to be a new employee not employed in the last 6 months. That's absolutely the case. You're not restricted in duration, so Kickstart 6 months. For the apprenticeship, there's no precise rule on duration except for the apprentice must be brought in with an apprenticeship agreement that lasts for the minimum time of the apprenticeship itself plus 1 day, or ideally longer. So you couldn't bring somebody in, think, oh, well, I'll try them out for 6 months on the apprenticeship incentive payment. I'll get that money. Thank you very much. And then we'll see. No, it's got to be really firm that if you're recruiting an apprentice, your obligation is for the duration of that apprenticeship agreement. Now, sometimes things happen along the way. If there's a redundancy consultation that couldn't have been envisaged, then there are ways to address that. But really, the intent from the employer at the outset must be that we are bringing in this person for the whole duration of their entire apprenticeship. And one other thing to watch for everybody is that the way these incentive payments are going to be accessed are through the online government apprenticeship service system. And businesses who, are levy payers already will be used to that because they use that to access their levy account. For non-levy payers, for SMEs, this could be new for you to do. So you will need to create yourself an account, and there are lots of really good examples on YouTube of how to do that, and on gov.uk as well. So you need to be on the apprenticeship service. You're not restricted with those apprenticeship incentives as to how many apprentices you bring in, by the way. That's one thing worth noting. So if you really did have a fabulous growth in an expectation and you wanted to bring in 15 apprentices, then you would be eligible for the apprentice incentives for all of those, subject to the points we've already made about new employee and when they're being recruited and the contract in place, etc. So the main thing is, if you're not on the apprenticeship service so far, that would be my priority for you, that you get yourself signed up for that so that you can benefit from these new incentives.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jenny. And you raised a good point there, is if you do want any help and support with that, like you said, there are some really good YouTube videos out there where it will guide you and navigate you through that whole process. Well, brilliant. Thank you so much for that. I think that's been really useful for everyone that's out there. Thank you for your time. I hope you feel better soon, Jenny.
Thank you.
Now, if you want to find out more, because again, this is a wider conversation you may want to discuss with us in more detail, you can reach out to CIMA. So you've got all of our details there on the screen. You can reach out to Kaplan, and we do have a group of relationship managers that will be able to discuss your apprenticeship needs in a lot more detail. Kaplan also recently hosted a webinar on this exact topic. So if you want to listen to something in a lot more detail, I will add that session into the comments so you'll be able to follow through. But again, thank you, Jenny, very much for your time. It's really been appreciated. Hopefully you've all found this useful. Take care, and we look forward to speaking to you on our next session. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Jason.